The NFL show, as always, is brought to you by Manscaped. Make sure you check them out at manscaped.com. Use the promo code TGT20 for 20% off your first purchase and free shipping. I am your host for the NFL show, Mike Goodpasser. Right now, I'd like to welcome in. He's on remote from Clemson University. He's not really. I think he's at home now. But Sam Teets. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing great, Mike. How about you?
I am doing awesome. And the one thing that really struck me as weird is RG3 yesterday was throwing passes to Dez Bryant in an NFL game that started at 3:40 on a Wednesday. Welcome to 2020.
Yeah, I mean, that's about as crazy as you can get. Dez Brown's a guy everyone thought was out of the league. RG3, he's had a couple starts against the Steelers the past couple of years, but mainly that's been because Lamar Jackson's been sitting out and the Baltimore haven't had anything to play for late in the season. So to me, it was really weird to see this all set up. And certainly it was not a game I enjoyed watching.
It wasn't. You're a Steeler fan, and you won.
Yeah, but sometimes it's the way you win doesn't necessarily make it that great. And of course, I think the biggest, honestly, winning the game to me wasn't the biggest takeaway from yesterday. Losing Bud Dupree for the season to a torn ACL was probably the biggest loss of the day.
Yeah, and that's two big-time losses they've had to that defense. And you got to wonder when it'll catch up to them. It hasn't affected them so far, but now with a second guy down, especially Bud Dupree, comes off the edge. I know they're 11-0, but you're a Steelers fan. Is this an uncomfortable 11-0, if that's possible?
I would feel much better, actually, if we were 10-1. I'll be honest. If we just had lost the game already, I feel like the pressure is kind of building to a point where, you don't want to necessarily be that undefeated team down the stretch because it comes into point where you're getting a little more distracted potentially with the record than with the actual performing, getting ready for the playoffs. And also, yeah, it is an uncomfortable situation because they've had so many close games here this year, and they're winning. Don't get me wrong. I always trust Ben Roethlisberger to find a way to win at the end of the game. I trust our defense to hold up at the end. But you look back at games like Baltimore the first time around, the Cowboys game, the Tennessee Titans game, they're all very close, and they're all unnecessarily close to me. So I am a little concerned here. This is certainly not one of the top two teams in the NFL right now. That would be the Saints and the Chiefs.
Yeah, and since they played on Wednesday, this looked like one of those midweek MAC games. Turnovers all over the place. There were 4 turnovers that happened in rapid succession in the first quarter. RG3, of course, got the pick 6, which, was probably the difference in the game. Roethlisberger threw a horrible interception to Tyus Bowser in the end zone. This game was a mess for both teams, but I think it's to be expected with the Ravens with all the players they're missing, if you know what I mean. I mean, you're missing that many guys. I mean, and that many weapons. I mean, RJ3 only threw for like 33 yards, ran for 68, but I don't really blame him because he didn't really have much to work with here.
Well, no, and the offensive line was dinged up as well. I mean, the Ravens really should be proud of how they played, all things considered, yesterday. And for Pittsburgh, obviously, it's a huge disappointment how they played. It's a crazy week. I don't know if I can hold this about them long term, but I also was saying this to my friends the other day because some people were betting on the spread and all that stuff like that. I'm like, look, this is going to be a one-score game. I don't care how you slice it. Pittsburgh was due for a game like this. It was going to happen because they had just come out 2 big wins against bad teams in Jacksonville and Cincinnati. And this is how Pittsburgh does it. They like to make games unnecessarily close, which, of course, is not very comfortable for fans, and especially won't be very comfortable when you face a team potentially like a Kansas City in the playoffs. So to me, the outcome of this game, the score was not necessarily shocking. What was shocking was how poorly certain players played for Pittsburgh. The interception that Ben threw wasn't a big deal to me because they weren't going to get anything on that play anyways. It was going to be 4th down, you're going to turn the ball over. So the interception wasn't a huge deal. What was a huge deal was the number of drops. They had like 7 or 8 drops in that game, including a would-be touchdown by James Washington, a would-be touchdown by Deontay Johnson, Eric Ebron just flat out dropping what would have been a first down pass. There were so many miscues there, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And then Terrell Edmonds completely whiffing on a tackle late in the game that allowed Marquise Brown to go score for a touchdown. There were so many issues there. These all need to be addressed. And they play Washington in 5 days. And Washington, quite frankly, scares me a little because of how well they're playing.
Yeah, and the other thing that would scare me if I'm Pittsburgh is Washington's ability to run the ball, and especially Bud Dupree down now. You're already missing a couple guys that are really needed there, and this is a team that's not great against stopping the run anyways, are they, Sam? At least from the games I've seen from them this year.
No, I mean, they were pretty good at the start of the year. They handled Derrick Henry fairly well, except for one run. They handled Miles Sanders kind of well. They've dropped off, though. The first, I want to say, 5 or 6 weeks of the year, they were very good against the run. Since then, they've really fallen off. I think part of that is losing Devin Bush. I think it's played a role in it. and coming up against Antonio Gibson, who played really well this past weekend, it's going to be a really tough sell for me. Especially, you might not have Stephon Tuitt either. A defensive end who's having potentially a pro league. I think he has 7 sacks already. He's on the COVID list. I don't know if he's going to be available for the Washington game. And you remove Bud Dupree, who's having a career year and also playing the run much better this year than past seasons. Suddenly, this becomes a huge situation here, a huge issue potentially.
Yeah, and I really give credit to Baltimore's defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, who turned up the heat at the start of the second half, which helped keep this game close. The guy that really stood out to me was Chuck Clark, who was all over the field, recorded 13 tackles, made key plays on the ball to limit Pittsburgh's attempt to blow this open with deep shots. So the Baltimore defense, which I have capped on a lot, I thought played very well, but I don't know if it was so much they played well or Pittsburgh just made constant mistake after mistake here.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think you could give credit where it's due. I mean, Chuck Clark, this is the reason why they were comfortable moving on from Earl Thomas, because they had Chuck Clark. They would rather have Clark around than Earl Thomas, which is part of the reason why they have this new safety combination, why they were comfortable letting Earl Thomas go earlier this year. And as for Pittsburgh, I mean, I think Chase Claypool had a drop on the very first drive of the game that would have gone for like 30 yards. So really, Pittsburgh helped out Baltimore quite a bit in this game, especially because Baltimore was missing a lot of players along the defensive line. But that secondary has really been the backbone of that team this year.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you really have to worry about if you're a Ravens fan, still not healthy, don't know when they'll be completely healthy. But right now, from looking at it, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Their problem is you've got 7 teams, and 7 make the playoffs that all have more wins than them right now. So they're a game out of a playoff spot right now.
Yeah, but luckily for Baltimore, I mean, if you look at their schedule, they play Dallas, they play Cleveland, they play Jacksonville, they play the Giants, and then they play the Bengals. So basically, as long as you just don't screw anything up, you're going to make the playoffs. You're going to get 11 wins this year. They have 6 wins already. The only question mark would be Cleveland. They play Cleveland in the first week of the year. And so Cleveland's very different now, I think, than they were in the first week. It'll be very interesting to see.
That's the big thing.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. If you've got Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt both, yeah, I think they could get up. I think they could win the game. The Giants, I would have a hard time thinking they could. The Bengals, I would have a hard time thinking they could beat anybody right now. The Jags, no. So, I mean, basically, if they could get past the Cowboys and the Browns, they win out. They go 11-5. They make the playoffs and get beat in the first or second round.
Yeah, I think this is probably a first-round team, unless Lamar Jackson does some kind of crazy turnaround. But to me, a one-dimensional team, and even Pittsburgh can't run the ball that much. A one-dimensional team is really going to get stronger to get past the first round of the playoffs. That's why a first-round bye would be so huge for Pittsburgh this year.
I don't know that it would. It just means they don't lose that first game, but they'll probably lose in the first round of divisional playoffs because the way this sets up, I mean, who would be the number 4 seed right now?
Let me pull it up. Let me look at the standings right now. Number 4 seed. Let's see. Pittsburgh 1, Kansas City 2, Buffalo 3. Number 4 would be Tennessee right now.
Yeah, and you're gone in the first round.
Because we did beat Tennessee earlier this year.
I don't care. You know, Cincinnati beat Tennessee earlier this year. Do you think they would beat them a month from now in a playoff game? I mean, Tennessee was also in their bad part of the season where they went 3 or 4 games where they didn't play that well. And I'm sorry, if you can't stop the run and you're playing Derrick Henry, you got issues. And without Bud Dupree at defensive end to rush Ryan Tannehill, that could get bad really quick no matter where you play that game.
No, that's fair. I still think the Bud Dupree loss is either going to be one of 2 things, either catastrophic or really just a blip. They do have Alex Highsmith, a promising rookie, athletic rookie. The issue is Bud Dupree, I'm not sure how much of this is his production versus how much of this is him benefiting from playing alongside T.J. Watt and Cameron Hayward, 2 first-team All-Pros. That draws a lot of double teams, lets him get a lot of one-on-one options on the outside. That helps out quite a bit.
Yeah, but the thing I would bring up there, even with that is, once you take Bud Dupree out, it doesn't matter who you bring in. Who's the guy behind the guy you bring in now? It hurts your depth. And on the defensive line, you got to have some depth. The defensive end, you got to have some depth. So I think that's a huge issue here is you just take down your defensive line depth.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think putting Alex Highsmith in, you can survive with that. But after that, you don't have that kind of depth anymore. And you're right. Because Pittsburgh does like running rotations where they have Highsmith in a couple times per game. And now you're in a situation where, well, you got to sub T.J. Watt and Highsmith out at some point. You have to have someone else come in and play a few snaps here and there. And that could give up big plays.
Yeah, and we don't know what Highsmith's going to do as a starter.
No,
so that's a killer too. When you look at the Steelers, do they go 16-0, Sam?
I have a hard time thinking 16-0. I mean, just because so few teams have done it. The Washington game coming up this week kind of scares me because it's a very short turnaround from Baltimore. I think they'll get together though after this tough loss, or not tough loss. It felt like a loss though. After this tough win, I think they'll win that game. The question for me is Buffalo. The Buffalo game is probably going to be the toughest challenge for them, especially because Josh Allen. We saw they had trouble stopping RG3 running the ball the other day. Facing Josh Allen, it's going to be much worse because Josh Allen's quicker, faster, and stronger than RG3 at this point. I think that Buffalo game is probably going to get them.
Well, I think this. I think Washington could. I think Buffalo will. I think the Colts could. I think the Browns could. I mean, I think right there you could lose 4 of those 5, but I expect them to go 3-2.
Yeah, I think 3-2 would probably be the floor for me. I think 3-2 is at least what you're going to get out of the situation.
But I'll tell you what, things could go bad really quick here if they lose to Washington.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So then you're reeling off of that. You have a short stretch because you're playing, I think, 3 games in 12 days, I believe is what they said. So it's going to be a tough situation where suddenly you have a turnaround. You have to play the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are a very good team. And if you lose all that momentum with the injuries and everything like that, you could really hit a tailspin here at the end of the year. And this is why I said I would much rather be 10-1 right now than 11-0. Because if you have that bad stretch in the middle of the season, you can still get ready and fix yourself up for the playoffs.
Okay, which is what I told you about the Tennessee Titans a few weeks ago. And then they did. But the one thing that saves them is they got the Bengals in the middle, so you know they're not going to lose out.
Yeah, exactly. They got at least one guaranteed win in there.
There are no guaranteed wins in the NFL.
And we definitely learned that last night.
Play the Bengals. Why? You won the game, so there was. But
but it was very close.
Hey,
I mean, there were so many plays that could have changed that game. I mean, Micah Fitzpatrick drops an interception like that would have stopped the Marquise Brown touchdown. Micah Fitzpatrick drops that. There were so many plays in that game that could have just changed the whole situation.
Well, and I tried to warn people. You know, this is why I did this. When I said the show before yesterday, the last one I was on, where I said anytime it's a divisional rival and the point spread is 10 points or more, take the underdog. Because I don't know the stats on that. Maybe if Bobby Sheridan's listening, he can look it up. But I think that a 10-point dog in a divisional game, at least half the time covers, probably more than half the time.
Well, we even saw it with San Francisco, Los Angeles this past weekend, where San Francisco won. I mean, divisional games, you could be a really bad team and still play a close game against a very competitive team.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And then you got the COVID thing thrown in too. You remember, was it Tennessee and Buffalo earlier this year, where everybody thought Tennessee was going to beat because they were going to get beat because they were missing a bunch of players, and they came out and just destroyed Buffalo, didn't they?
Let me think. I don't know if that was the game. I think it might have been. Was it? Yeah, it was 42-16. You're right. That was week 4.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people forget all these guys are NFL football players. So even the guys that are backups are pretty good. And you have a tendency, if you're playing a team that has a bunch of injuries, that seems to have a lot of issues, and with all the distractions just weren't for the Ravens. It was the Steelers also even wondering if they were going to play. So I think that's what makes games really tough to bet this year. And I think anytime you get a double-digit underdog anymore, you damn near better just to take them, unless they're the New York Jets.
The New York Jets are the only team you can probably guarantee this year won't win a game. And also, like you said, for Pittsburgh, I mean, they didn't know that we didn't know that Marcus Pouncey was going on the COVID-19 list until hours before the game. I only heard about it at, I don't say, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and Marcus Pouncey didn't end up playing. He was the starting center. So, I mean, that's a huge hit. You talked about COVID-19. You just don't know when this stuff's coming up.
All right, next up. Are Tom Brady's problems because of Bruce Arians? And the reason I say that is when I watched the Bucs this year, the one thing it seems to me is they tend to throw the ball deep down the field. They tend to take a lot of chances in their play calling. And I went back just for the hell of it, and I looked at every first-year quarterback that Bruce Arians has coached. And when you go back to Carson Palmer, 24 touchdowns, 22 picks. Andrew Luck, 23-18. Big Ben, 32-11. Tim Couch, 17-21. Peyton Manning, 26-28. Jameis Winston, 33-30. Brady, 28-11. I think really Bruce Arians' offense is not conducive to Tom Brady. And I think what we saw last week was them starting to go more towards what are Tom Brady's strengths.
That's what we're going to have to do if they want to make a deep run here in the playoffs. And we talked about this a little bit before the show. Tom Brady's usual playing style is you have James White coming out of the backfield. He's one of the best receiving backs in the league. You've got guys like Julian Edelman or Danny Amendola who can get out and get open very quickly, anywhere between 5 to 12 yards downfield. You don't have many of these deep shot guys anymore. I mean, think about the last time they had a deep shot wide receiver in New England with Tom Brady. It was probably Randy Moss, I would say. Before that, even before that, and even after that, they really don't have a guy who'd run down the field and throw 50 yards to. So this is not the style of play Tom Brady embraces usually.
And I believe this. I believe you will see the offense to go more towards what Brady likes to do. I don't think they will lose another game in the regular season.
Really? I think 43-year-old Tom Brady is going to clutch it out here and potentially go undefeated the rest of the way?
I think he will. You've got Detroit. You got Atlanta twice, which Atlanta's become dangerous. Ask the Raiders if you don't believe me. You got the Vikings, who are dangerous. I think this next game against the Vikings is huge for the Buccaneers. What are they, 7-5 right now?
You pull up the standings. They are 7-5.
Yeah, so if you get this Bucs win, I think you could very easily run this out at 11-5 and be in pretty good shape come playoff time.
Yeah, I think they just need a little momentum, right? They just need to get a win here. And as long as you can grab a win against Minnesota, that's probably your toughest remaining competitor. So if you get the win against Minnesota here, Atlanta's probably going to be coming off a loss to New Orleans because they play the Saints this weekend. So the Falcons will have no momentum. Tampa Bay will have all the momentum going into that game. They can probably carry that out the rest of the year. My big question is what happens here if Tom Brady continues to have the multi-interception games?
How about
11 interceptions? It's already more than what he had last year.
How about this? Number one, he's still 28-11, which is 2.5 to 1, which is not terrible. I mean, it's just because it's Tom Brady. He threw more than 10 in a year. We do only have 4 games left. He's probably going to end up with 40 touchdown passes, maybe 15 interceptions. Most guys would kill for those numbers. When you look at the Saints, not to get ahead of ourselves for tomorrow's show, I think the Falcons are going to beat the Saints. And I think that will lead to the Falcons being real happy going to Tampa Bay and losing. But when we look at the Saints, I think the Saints could lose. I think they could lose to the Chiefs. I think they could lose to the Falcons. I think they could lose to the Vikings. I think they could lose to Carolina. The only game that I think is safe when I look at it is the game against Philadelphia. So right now at 9-2, I think Atlanta upsets them. They beat the Eagles. They lose to the Chiefs. And then you're going to have to win against either the Vikings or the Panthers to win the division. Chances are that happens, but I don't even think they're completely out of the woods yet on winning the division.
Well, no, especially Drew Brees remains sidelined because we saw what Taysom Hill did when they first played Atlanta. He was very.
He
wasn't very good. He was okay.
Back, if Drew Brees was back, they would run this table. They're going to the Super Bowl. But I mean, what was it? 10 or 12 broken ribs and a punctured lung.
It doesn't sound
serious.
Yeah, I mean, really. Let's be honest. Drew Brees is how old? He's like 41, 40 years old. He's not going to necessarily come back from this in 2 or 3 weeks. It's going to take some time. Yeah. And Taysom Hill, we saw against Denver. They specifically went with a run-oriented style of attack because, A, Denver didn't have a quarterback, so why would you throw the ball and make risks? But B, they were trying to protect Taysom Hill from Denver's secondary. Denver has Justin Simmons at safety. They have Kareem Jackson at safety. They have Bryce Callahan at cornerback. They have 3 of the best defensive backs in the NFL right now. They did not want Taysom Hill throwing against that secondary. If you are so worried about Taysom Hill throwing against Denver that you won't let him throw more than 16 times per game, you're going to lose some of these games. You're going to lose to a Vikings team that's going to be scrappy and have Kirk Cousins and Dalvin Cook. You're going to lose to Atlanta.
Yeah.
I mean, with Matt Ryan.
Yeah. I mean, because Matt Ryan can put points up, and I think Julio Jones didn't play that much a couple weeks ago, did he?
He did not play against the Raiders, who was battling an injury, I believe, when last time they played.
All right, let's go to the 2020 top 10 NFL MVP candidates. Doesn't even have to be 10. We're just going to discuss it. And I think the thing that stands out to me is first half of the season, I think it was hands down Russell Wilson. Now it seems to be hands down Patrick Mahomes. So the question is, can anybody beat out Patrick Mahomes? And when I look at this, do you agree right now that Mahomes would be number 1?
Oh, yeah, that's why he's number 1 in like quarterback power rankings. I absolutely believe he's number 1 on this list.
Who do you think is number 2 with the best chance to beat him out?
You know, I hate saying this, but it's Aaron Rodgers, right? Is it Aaron Rodgers? Because to me, Aaron Rodgers has 33 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He's on a team that's going to win a division. He's got a great passer rating. He's actually leading all quarterbacks with a 117.6 passer rating. He's the only one above Patrick Mahomes in that category. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, to me, I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to win a 3rd MVP. Don't get me wrong, but it feels like he should be the one in 2nd place.
All right. I think it should be Derrick Henry. I think Henry is leading the NFL in rushing, 1,257 yards, averaging 114 yards per game. His performance against Indianapolis, 29 carries, 178 yards, 3 touchdowns, was his 8th straight regular season road game with 100 more rushing yards dating back to 2019. And in those road games, the Titans are 7-1. I think the 5th-year back has 700-yard games this season, which is the most in the NFL. He's number 1 in rushing yards. And, I mean, if he is to continue or continues to put up 150 yards a game, why can't it be Derrick Henry? Because Derrick Henry can dominate a game just like Patrick Mahomes can. Derrick Henry can dominate it even more because if you've got Patrick Mahomes on the other offense, Derrick Henry being on the field can keep Patrick Mahomes off of the field.
Yeah, I just did some quick math. Derrick Henry's pacing 1,828 rushing yards. So he's going to have a massive total here. And, I think it might take another huge game because you can get closer to 2,000 rushing yards. You can get closer to 1,900. I think that would really put you in place where you're competing for an MVP. I think it's a passing league, though. I think for what how it is, Mike. Running backs don't get their fair share when it comes to these kind of awards.
I know. I'm not saying he will. I'm just saying when I look at this, my number 2 would be Derek Allen, and you know who my number 3 would be?
Who?
Ben Roethlisberger.
All right, Mike. I'm here for this. Let's hear the explanation. Why would Ben be
38 years old? He's having arguably the best season of his career. When have we ever seen Big Ben have 25 touchdown passes and just 6 interceptions? That's at 11 games. I mean, that's more than 4-to-1 touchdown interception, 2,800 yards. Their running game is not very good. They've got a bunch of guys at wide receiver. I mean, Chase Claypool, I think, is going to be a stud. Juju Smith-Schuster is a good receiver. Most teams have 2 good receivers. But he's got his highest passer rating, which is 99 since 2014. He's on pace to reach 4,000 plus passing yards and 40 touchdowns with fewer than 10 interceptions. So I'm sorry, I'm not a Steelers fan, but Big Ben to me is the difference in this team being 500, and the difference in this team is undefeated. And see, I think that's another thing that has to play into here. And people say, well, the schedule is not tough. It doesn't matter what the schedule is. They've played 11 NFL teams. They've won all 11 games. Most of those games were close. Now, if you say, well, see, that proves they're not that good, I would say, all right, I agree. It proves that they're probably not an 11-0 team. But when you do that, you have to make the concession that the reason they're 11-0 is because of Big Ben.
I mean, we saw what happened last year when they didn't have Big Ben, 8-8. Now this season they're undefeated. That is the difference makers. You have an offense. You have a passing quarterback here. I don't know if I go MVP because is MVP right now for the NFL, because the NFL defines this very strangely. Is it the best player or is it the player that's most valuable to his team? Because if you're saying most valuable to his team, I absolutely believe Ben Roethlisberger belongs to that conversation.
Well, that's what it is. I mean, it's most valuable player. I mean, when you look at Patrick Mahomes, no offense, Patrick Mahomes, because he's the best quarterback in the NFL right now. To me, it's him and Deshaun Watson. But I think with the talent in Kansas City, you put Derek Carr in Kansas City and he would be an MVP candidate. He would be an MVP candidate. There's a lot of guys. Daniel Jones would be successful there. And that's not a shot on Mahomes because really this offense was built for what Patrick Mahomes does. But there's so much talent there. They're going to win a lot of games almost no matter who the quarterback is, Sam.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, really, you could probably replace Mahomes in Kansas City. And one of the favorite things people talk about is what happens to Deshaun Watson went to Kansas City. It would probably be, I think you still win a Super Bowl here in the first couple of years. Because
I think they'd have won 2 already because I mean, it's hard to say anybody's better, but if I had to pick, because I'm going to say right now, Patrick Mahomes is playing better than anybody else. But once again, if I had to pick a quarterback to start a team with in the NFL out of everybody, including Patrick Mahomes and my beloved Joe Burrow, I'm taking Deshaun Watson.
Well, Deshaun Watson also entered the NFL ready to play versus Patrick Mahomes, who had to sit out a year. And really, and like even Tyreek Hill said recently on one of the ESPN shows that he thought Mahomes was terrible during his rookie season when he was working with him.
Well, and now but this is the thing, though. The one thing you got to look at with him is Mahomes played in basically an air raid system. And an air raid system is not really designed, it can work in the NFL, but not the way it was run at college, not the way it was run at Texas Tech. Deshaun Watson was in a pro-style offense at Clemson. So I'm not going to hold that against Mahomes because Mahomes went in there, worked his ass off, and a year later had Kansas City one offsides penalty or pass interference, whatever it was, away from going to the Super Bowl. So I'm not going to hold that against him. But Deshaun Watson's the real deal. And I think 5 or 6 years from now, as long as Houston puts some guys around him and gives him a coach, I think he'll be the guy number one on this list the majority of the times.
When you see him, he recently in public, they have known that he wants to keep Will Fuller in Houston. Will Fuller, by the way, has been his top receiver this year. He struggled with injuries in the past, but Watson needs everything he can get in Houston because he doesn't have a guy like DeAndre Hopkins or a guy like Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce. He doesn't even have a Clyde Edwards-Helaire right now to help him out. So Watson, who's got 24 touchdowns, 5 interceptions this year, you put him in a much better offense with much better players around him. I think he easily has 38 touchdowns this season.
All right, my 3 and 4 would be Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers in any order. I think this, though. I think the Rodgers team, I just don't see either one of these guys winning the MVP right now. I mean, Rodgers is playing as well as anybody. But Patrick Mahomes is, let's face it, he is the media darling right now. Derrick Henry would be the everyman guy that everybody wants to see win. I think it's going to come down between those two. I think Rodgers and Wilson, unless they're just off the charts, untouchable, and their teams win out, I don't really think they have much of a shot here.
Well, the only thing I think could make Mahomes or Derrick Henry come back to the field is either of them plays very poorly towards the end of the season. Maybe even if they sit out a week 17, they don't have to play, which I don't think will happen for Kansas City because they're right behind Pittsburgh right now. But either of those guys sit out week 17, maybe that makes it closer. You're really relying, you're asking on people to make mistakes to get back in this race. And like with Russell Wilson was going to run away with the MVP if he just played consistent football. But I think in the course of 5 weeks, he had 3 multi-turnover games. So to me, Russell Wilson kind of gave up that lead, which is why he's now in 3rd or 4th place here.
Yeah, and
that's exactly what Mahomes can't do.
I don't think the Packers are good enough to win out and to put him in the conversation. And when you talk about Aaron Rodgers,
what's their remaining schedule look like? Let me pull it up.
I don't know. I said that, and I knew I should have looked at the schedule before I said that because they could play a really turd schedule and maybe get away with some stuff. But
yeah, they're 8-3 right now. They have to play the Eagles. That's a win. They play the Lions. That should be a win. The Panthers, that could be a question mark. They played the Titans in week 16. That's going to be a good one.
They'll lose it.
Chicago in week 17. Yeah, they're going to lose that game. Derrick Henry's going to run for 200 yards.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that could put him in it, though, is if Derrick Henry runs for 200 and Aaron Rodgers throws for 400 and wins the game.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And they had to keep those do that. Aaron Rodgers, by the way, is not working with the best receiver core in the NFL. They only have one number 1 guy in Devontae Adams. They don't really have a great number 2 option there either.
Now, I'm going to throw one other name in because I just said him, Deshaun Watson. And I think the circumstances of other people's ineptitude continue to negatively impact Watson. And we saw that just Monday within a matter of hours. Their top wide receiver, Will Fuller, top cornerback, Bradley Roby, PED suspensions. And despite all of this, though, Watson has single-handedly carried Houston throughout a, for lack of a better term, abhorrent season. And in his past 6 games, Watson has completed 141 of 200 passes for 1,750 yards, 16 touchdowns, no turnovers. That's better than anybody is playing right now.
Wait, you look what he had to deal with at the start of the year. His first three interceptions this year came against Kansas City week 1, Baltimore week 2, Pittsburgh week 3. We just talked about how good Baltimore's secondary, and we've talked about how good Pittsburgh's defense is. And Kansas City, the reigning Super Bowl champs, were coming off a hot defensive streak in week 1. So really, Watson played 3 of the best teams in the NFL there and still held it together.
Yeah, another guy I would throw out just for the hell of it would be Derek Carr. And I know the loss to the Falcons was gross, but I think everybody deserves a complete and utter meltdown from time to time. And, I mean, Derek Carr could have easily beaten the Chiefs twice if the Raiders would have left Mahomes 40 seconds instead of a minute 40 seconds. They'd have beat him twice. He's beaten the Saints. When I look at it, I'm not saying that he should be in the conversation top 5, but I think he's a guy that has played good enough to get more respect than what he's getting.
Yeah, he's completing about 70% of his passes, 19 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. To me, the fumbles are probably what's going to get him here. He's had a lot of fumbles this season, but he does have 104.9 passer rating. He's certainly underrated in terms of ranking top quarterbacks in the NFL. If I was to throw out another name potentially for this MVP race, if we're staying on the offensive side of the ball, the other 2 running backs who would probably have a chance are Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara. So, I mean,
Yeah,
Dalvin Cook is kind of carried. I know that Kirk Cousins is starting to come back to the field
this
now.
is the thing, though. I mean, Derrick Henry dominates games.
Yeah.
And I don't even know that Derrick Henry needs a great offensive line, because I don't think Tennessee has a great offensive line. I think they're good, but Derrick Henry is just a bad dude.
No, I think Tennessee's all lines in the middle of the pack right now. Dalvin Cook, to me, is probably the closest to Derrick Henry in terms of the running backs right now. I still think it's Derrick Henry by a mile, don't get me wrong. Cook does have the most rushing touchdowns in the NFL with 13, but he's trailing behind Derrick Henry in the rushing yards race. He is averaging 113 yards per game, though, and to me, that's good enough to have him at least in the conversation.
All right. Did you talk about Doug Peterson yesterday?
I did. I actually spent some time talking about him, but it'd be interesting to get your perspective.
Well, my perspective is he sucks now. And I think the biggest perspective from this is, number one, I think he's way into the analytics thing, which I hate analytics. I mean, but the other thing is, when this team was really good on offense, who was calling the plays?
Was it Frank Reich?
It was Frank Reich. So my thing is this. I think he's a good football coach. Maybe he needs a new OC. But I think the loss of Frank Reich was huge for them. I don't think Frank Reich is necessarily a great football coach, but I think he's a great offensive coordinator. I'm just saying there's a difference between offensive coordinator and head coach. I do think Reich is a solid coach, but I think he was a great offensive coordinator, and I think people don't realize how much they miss him.
When you even look what he's doing with Indianapolis with Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers is the guy we thought was washed up coming into the year.
He is really washed up. That's what makes him
but look what he's done the past 6 or 7 weeks, though.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been a top 10 quarterback in the NFL this season. I never thought I would say that about Phillip Rivers. So he's not working with wide receivers either. So I think Frank Reich deserves his due there. He's a great OC. And really, Doug Peterson, he's calling plays that put Carson Wentz just in terrible situations.
Yeah. I mean, I really, when I watched the play calling, because I hadn't paid much attention to the Eagles except the tie they played against the Bengals. But the tie against the Bengals, and what I saw, what was it, Monday night? I don't know. Hell, you never know. It seems like there's a COVID game of the week every night. But when I look at it, it's kind of like when I watch Bruce Arians and Tom Brady. I mean, it looks to me like the coaches are not putting, or the play callers aren't putting the players in the best situation to succeed.
No, and Carson Wentz, Carson Wentz is a little rattled right now. He's making mistakes. So why would you give him difficult looks? Why would you give him situations where you're putting 2 wide receivers up against 5 or 6 defensive backs and asking him to make a play? Because he's going to throw an interception, or he's going to hold the ball and get sacked. You know it's going to be one of the 2 options, and yet you still make that play call. So to me, there are so many situations this year where Doug Peterson just made bad calls. I think you have to put GM Howie Roseman under the spotlight a little bit too. I mean, this team is $49 million over the cap, I believe, going into next year. They've done a terrible job drafting wide receivers. They've missed on guys like DK Metcalf. You take Jalen Reagor instead of taking Justin Jefferson or trading up to get CeeDee Lamb. You take J.J. Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf or Terry McLaurin. There are so many mistakes here in drafting offensive weapons. I think Roseman has to be under a spotlight as well.
All right. Who is the offensive coordinator? Is it Peterson?
I think Peterson's calling the plays, I'm pretty sure. I think he's starting to split play calling duties now.
Oh, dude, really? The passing game coordinator is Press Taylor. That just sounds like a dude that probably shouldn't coach football. He sounds soft, doesn't he?
Is it because he sounds like Zach Taylor?
Yeah, it probably is. You got it. But Press Taylor, who enters his 8th season with the Eagles, earned the title and responsibility of passing game coordinator during the 2020 offseason. He's been with the Eagles staff as a quality control coach since 2013. So Press Taylor is the guy who helps there. But I can tell you this, if Doug Peterson is the offensive coordinator and calls the plays, which he does, he should be fired.
I mean, it's that simple, right? I mean, they're not running the ball quite a bit. I mean, I know the offensive line's beat up. I understand that. But you have Miles Sanders. To me, Miles Sanders during the year was a top 10 running back in the league with a lot of potential. He's been beat up a little bit this year. But you have not put Miles Sanders in a position to succeed either. And he's not helped take any pressure off of Carson Wentz. I know they're dealing with injuries, but at some point, you have to look at the coaching staff and say, hey, they are not putting their players in a spot to be successful. They should have more wins this year. They should be winning this division considering everything else every other team is going through. And the fact that they're not is pretty damning.
And I can tell you this, Press Taylor's resume is very light.
I think we talked about quality control coaches like was it last week already, how the positions don't always, how the resumes aren't always great for those kind of
most
things.
people start off as a quality control coach.
Okay.
But the problem is this. What did you do to get to be the quality control coach? He was a GA at Tulsa. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad, but then he's the quarterback's coach, the assistant quarterback's coach, and now he's the passing game coordinator. And when the passing game's not working, you do kind of have to question that, don't you?
Yeah, I have to question the qualifications and the abilities of those in charge. And Doug Peterson, well, like you said, Doug Peterson was a very good head coach ending this season. I defended Doug Peterson, and so did you, as a top 10 head coach in the NFL. And we did so for the couple of weeks into the year.
Dude, I put him in the top 5 off of that Super Bowl season. But when you look at it, the big difference is, you know what the big difference is.
Frank Wright?
Yeah. And I mean, you look at the running back coach or the running game coordinator coach, and that's Matt Burke. I know he sucks because he was a Bengals assistant 5 years ago. Being a Bengals assistant, shit. And this is the other thing. He is the run game coordinator / defensive line coach.
Those two don't usually go together, do they?
Well, remember, he's the run game coordinator for the offense. His career jobs are Tennessee Titans administrative assistant, defensive quality control coach. Then he goes to the Lions as a linebackers coach, the Bengals as a linebackers coach, the Dolphins as a linebackers coach, stays with the Dolphins as a linebackers coach, a defensive special assistant for the Eagles last year, and now he's the run game coordinator.
It seems like you should stay on the defense there. It doesn't seem like he's really the person taking over that job.
Yeah, and this is what I've tried to explain to you for the 2 or 3 years that I've known you when we do these shows. Most of these guys are not qualified to do what they're doing. They're just friends with the head coach.
Well, being friends with Doug Pearson might not help you out much longer because it sounds like the owner, Jeffrey Lurie, is starting to get a little bit annoyed with how this team is playing. He usually travels to every game. He's usually at most practices. He skipped the Cleveland game entirely, and apparently there's been arguments with some of the head coaches and some of the upper management over the course of this year. And apparently someone in the front office also told them to play Jalen Hurts if Carson Wentz did not perform well against Seattle, and they played Hurts for like 3 plays.
Well, at least they played him. Did they tell him to play more than 3 plays?
Apparently not. But I think that was Doug Pearson sticking it to him, saying, hey, look, we played him, but it was for 3 plays and didn't really do anything.
All right, Sam, you got anything else before we wrap it up?
I think we hit on all the big news for today.
All right, follow Sam at SamTeats33. And I think Sam will have pictures up later of his manscaping adventures on Twitter.
I don't know if I would go that far, Mike.
You don't know, which means it's possible you will.
Hey, you know what? You're right. I left the possibility out there.
Yeah, maybe, you know, you're a college kid. Maybe get a beer or 2 in you. Next thing you know, you're trying not to nick your nuts on, Twitter.
And you can have your own manscaping adventure. You can just go to manscaped.com and use promo code TGC20 for 20% off and free shipping.
Yeah, and you can tag us on any pictures of your manscaping adventure with the hashtag SamTeats. Look at this.
No, don't do that. Do not do that.
Oh, okay. Well, women use it too.
It's called Manscaped. You didn't know that, right? It's in the title.
I know, but a woman could use it. You can trim your body hair, like on your back and your arms, because nothing's more attractive than a woman with hair on her back.
I'm not even going to touch that one.
Neither would I. I was obviously being sarcastic about a woman with hair on her back. All right, guys. Make sure you go check us out at Rockfin. Make sure you sign up there. You can actually give us a tip when the show is up if you like what we do. Make sure you check us out on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Periscope, live every day at 1 o'clock. Tomorrow, me and Sam will be back to pick all the NFL games. Sam won last week, so I think I'm only up 10 weeks to 2 now.
I think it's actually the score, if we're being honest.
I know. So tomorrow we'll make it 11-2. 14-2 will give me home field advantage for the playoffs.
You don't need 14-2. You can get there with pretty much just cruising the rest of the year.
All right, guys. We're going to wrap it up. For Sam Teats, I'm Mike Goodpasser. You've been listening and watching The Grueling Truth, where the